Hey everybody, a quick note before we jump into the show. During the live broadcast, we had some technical issues that made the audio go a little bit wonky up until about the 16-minute mark. So totally understand if you do want to skip ahead, but we did have some great guests, some great conversation as always. So I do hope you enjoy and get a lot out of this one. If you do watch the whole thing, I'll leave it up to you. Enjoy. There we go. I love that jingle. Welcome once again to Veritas Live. We are live, as we are always every 3 weeks, to talk about those trending IT topics we know you are talking about that are impacting your business and your team. So welcome as we talk about optimizing Kubernetes. If this is your first time, my name is Joe. I'm based out here in Florida. I know you're thinking a hoodie must be a brave choice here in Florida. It's 90 degrees out there, but I'm repping the brand, so it's all good. Taking one for the team. So that's where I'm from. I'm here in Florida. But where are you from? We always appreciate hearing where you are viewing from. It's all about engagement with Veritas Live. So drop a comment to tell us where you're viewing from. We'll give you a shout out. And get your questions ready as we talk Kubernetes and best practices and the things to avoid. We want to talk about the things that you want to talk about too. Get your questions ready for our panel, who I'm going to introduce right about now. We always have a series of experts, so-called experts, and we're going to find out as we go into this discussion. But one that we are very, very excited to have with us is part of a partnership between Veritas and VMware. So a very warm welcome to our special guest. It's Kenny Coleman. Kenny, welcome to Veritas Live.
Hey, Joe, glad to be here and excited to be able to talk to a lot of your customers and just Veritas listeners, everybody out there in live world too, about everything that we're doing inside of VMware and the Tanzu portfolio. It's going to be real fun.
Yeah, it's a great partnership we have, a long-standing one, and let's see where we are right now when we're talking Kubernetes, NetBackup, Tanzu, all of those cool things that we're doing. And I've got to say, we've seen you at, the Open Source Summit, we've seen you at DockerCon, Cloud Native Con, but now you've made it.
I'm on Veritas Live. It's a dream come true. I mean, I've got a resume builder. That's really what it's come down to.
There we go. That's what we like to see. Great to have you with us. Thanks for spending time. We'll pick your brain in just a minute. Joining Kenny, of course, our Veritas internal experts. They know what they're talking about. And you may have heard him talking about it on show 2. This is Dan Rodriguez. So Dan was really representing the container side of the VM versus containers debate. Dan, welcome back to talk more about containers, Kubernetes. How are you?
Glad to be back. I'm doing great. Definitely not as hot as you are in that sweatshirt right now, but glad to be here and talking Kubernetes with everybody.
Awesome. I think you may have been that clear winner in that debate 6 weeks ago. That's why we welcomed you back. Let's talk Kubernetes and orchestration, all those things with containers. And of course, we must welcome that millennial mind of Anthony Cusimano back to Veritas Live. Welcome back, Anthony. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Joe. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So happy to be here.
Well, you always say that, but you've been on 3 times now, but it does feel like the first time every time we are doing this thing, one of the highlights
in my mind
of the month. All right, so before we get into Kubernetes, optimization, best practices, challenges, let's get to know our special guest just a little bit more. We always want to get to know our guests that come on, our partners, and we are the truth in information. But what is the truth that Kenny's going to tell us now? We asked you to come up with 2 truths and a lie, as we do with all our guests. Kenny, what have you got for us that we can guess?
I got 3 of them, and I actually took a good amount of time trying to figure these out because I wanted to find something that was kind of a little bit out there, but you might not guess. So you can probably see behind me, I've got a lot of whiskey bottles behind me. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, so it makes sense. I do a podcast on bourbon and some other stuff too. But it was would have been too easy to see, like, oh, this guy does something with bourbon, so I got a few for you. So one is that I was a very small minority share owner of the 2011 Kentucky Derby winner, Animal Kingdom. Number two, one of my posts went viral on TikTok, was then reposted by, of course, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And then number three is that I was standing next to Mark Cuban at an event, and I was just too afraid to talk to him.
All right. So we want you to reveal that at the end of the show, and if you are watching, if you want to take a guess at what you think the lie is, Kenny, Anthony, myself, and Dan will be trying to guess that later on. So we've got the Kentucky Derby winner, a small stakeholder in that. We've got Can You Smell What Kenny is Cooking? The Rock reposting the TikTok. Or we've got stood next to Mark Cuban, but didn't want to pitch him anything, didn't want to talk to him, or was a bit too afraid to engage. Have a guess, and we'll reveal that a little bit later on. A quick shout out to Massachusetts, a quick shout out to Paris. We've got Finland watching us, Istanbul. Love it. Good to see you. Good to have us with us. Keep those comments coming. Keep the questions coming. We're about to talk Kubernetes. We've got a very technical audience. We know you guys are technical out there, but before we get into it, let's just align quickly on Kubernetes. What is it? It's a hot topic. It's trending. Anthony, what's your high-level view of what we're talking about when we mention Kubernetes? What do you see?
Out of the three of us experts on here today, I'd say I'm the least expert, but I've been learning so much about Kubernetes in the last few years. And the way that I've described it to people when I'm explaining it is the way that we've moved from physical to virtual, we abstracted the hardware away. When we moved from virtual to the cloud, we abstracted the entire infrastructure away and then used someone else's computers. Well, Kubernetes is more of like the physical virtual, but this time we're abstracting the entire operating system, all the overhead of the application away. And we're making just a total abstraction of what you need to run these microservices and these micro businesses underneath this platform that's built for scale and performance and power. It's super cool, and just my humble opinion, I think it's the next big wave of technology, and it's just going to change the way businesses operate and the way we deliver applications.
Don't forget about automation. That's another big one.
Yeah, it is.
So we got a little bit of that from Anthony Kubernetes. What about Tanzu? We're going to mention it throughout the conversation. Kenny, can you just give us an overview? When we mention Tanzu, what do we mean?
Yeah, so Tanzu there might be a little bit of misconception around it because Tanzu is actually a whole portfolio of products that reside inside of what we call the modern applications business unit inside of VMware. And so it's not just Kubernetes as a part of Tanzu. There's part of an application build service, there's an application catalog, there's cloud native runtimes. This is starting to look stuff that is even beyond the scope of just running Kubernetes, but instead you're thinking of applications that don't necessarily need to run in containers, but you're making run packs for them. But I'm going to try to take this down to the level of conversation of really what we're focusing on here. And we look at a few different things in our product portfolio, and we have these pillars. And I manage what's called our run pillar. And this is like, how do we run our applications? And of course, we all look at Kubernetes. And so we have a few different products that kind of help that. We have our Tanzu Basic Edition, we've got our Tanzu Standard Edition, and then Tanzu Advanced Edition is getting into a lot of those modern application development side and development platforms. But Tanzu Basic and Tanzu Standard really focuses on how do we provide the best infrastructure capabilities of how to run Kubernetes, not just in vSphere, but across any cloud. And we do that, as we were saying earlier, through a heavy amount of automation. So making sure that we have a consistent way on how Kubernetes clusters are being built and how we are able to install applications seamlessly through them as well. And we make sure that they're conforming. I think that's a big thing that people might not understand is that you want to make sure that what we're taking is from the upstream is not modified or modified as least as possible to make sure that it is going to run on whatever infrastructure you want. But now that we just have the way that we build our Kubernetes clusters, we have to have a way to manage them as well. And so we have another, and that was really, I was talking about Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, and then we have another product inside of this this suite called Tanzu Mission Control, which is really what we call fleet-wide management. And so you're not just managing one Kubernetes cluster, you're managing tens or hundreds or potentially thousands of them across multiple data centers and multiple clouds. So a lot of different ways we could kind of take that, but try to be focused just on the Kubernetes aspect. There's a lot of different, again, tools, open source projects that really all build to kind of make this a wholesome kind of offering.
All right. Well, thank you for that overview.
Joe, real quick, I'm getting messages from Beyond the Great that you need to put on headphones. Just
I'm going to go put on headphones then. I'll
sure
do that. I'll leave it with you. I'll put on the headphones. You guys, I would like to talk about what's Kubernetes at its best. Anthony, take it from here. I'll go get the headphones.
No, you got it. So as I was saying before, I am just a dabbler, and I know that both Dan and Kenny dabble far more than I. But the thing that I've learned is Kubernetes at its best is when you've acknowledged just sort of the inherent properties of what is a good containerized application versus what isn't. So thinking about what should be taken and made stateless versus what should be made stateful. And Kubernetes does offer services for both of these. It does acknowledge the fact that not everything can be composable and ephemeral. So it has that stateful set. But first, you have to acknowledge, what am I using? What am I taking? What am I going to turn it into? If I'm going to refactor some 10-year-old application and just shove it into a container and then spawn it in Kubernetes, you're probably going to have a really bad time, and it might be less effective than it was before. So you have to first acknowledge what it is you're looking to do. Can you make it into a microservice? Can you refactor parts and pieces of these applications and deliver them as microservices? And then you will find that the performance, the scalability, the ability to compose these things on the fly and make them go faster and reduce boot time, reduce overhead and storage, you'll really sing in that Kubernetes space. But I'm curious to hear what the real experts have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it from here. So as a prior sysadmin, I know a lot of sysadmins out there probably watching this are like, well, Kubernetes to me is the ability to sleep at night. When I'm on call and an application goes down, that's probably the worst call you can get at around 2, 3 a.m. because we all know applications like to go down in the middle of the night. They don't like going down in the middle of the day. So what Kubernetes does is to me is automation and being able to spin up and spin down additional containers or be able to restart the application so that you don't get woken up at 2 a.m. So that automation is really key to be able to keep that application up and running in the middle of the night and, make sure that you're not woken up.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add on to that as well. And part of the automation is what we look at Kubernetes as being desired state. And knowing that whenever you want to provision anything, whether it is whether it's a data store, whether it's a network interface or a service, or it's a replica set, and how many replicas do you want, everything becomes, and not only that, it extends to extensibility. You can create your own custom resource definitions that allow you to apply Kubernetes native desired state actions to whatever it is that you want, which is a lot different than anything else that's been developed in the infrastructure world. So you're able to have a lot more control over what you want this to look like, and it's going to continue to repeat this process until it gets to that point. So if you want 5 of something, 3 of something, 10 of something, easy scale up, scale down without a whole lot of headache or interaction whatsoever.
All right, I'm just going to check if I'm back, team, and how that audio is. I've got the rep in the headphones now. Looks like I'm really wrapping up for the winter. And I'm going to see if I am good. Apologies for any of those technical difficulties. We've still got some good stuff coming. Thanks so much. What I am interested in is obviously we're seeing a real evolution, and we're seeing the adoption of Kubernetes that continue to increase. Obviously, with new technologies, we've got Kubernetes in its infancy still, about 7 years old, isn't it, that project? What challenges are we beginning to see, or are we still seeing when it comes to adoption, deployment of Kubernetes? Let's go with Dan, first of all.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with adoption, same as VMs when they first came out, is you need to learn how to crawl before you can walk. And a lot of customers that I talk to, or a lot of companies that I talk to, they want to go straight to production right away. But it takes a lot of planning to be able to run Kubernetes. And if you want to run it correctly, there's definitely a ton of planning and a ton of different groups you want to bring in. Most notably your network group and your security group. You want to make sure that whatever you build is secure and make sure that you bring in the right people right away.
I'll kind of go the opposite side of Dan here. So I was there at the very beginning when physical to virtual migration started happening, and I was I wouldn't say the beginning. I'd say like Docker 0.6 is kind of when I got started into this, and so I got to kind of see how long it took to go from physical to virtualization, and the ramp of just going straight to containers has been, I mean, it's amazing. I think 10 years has been taken down to about 2.5 of what we're seeing from the adoption of virtualization to containerization. And to kind of give you an idea, like, so I was part of a team that was developing some of the initial storage drivers for Docker, and really ended up actually becoming the container storage interface inside of Kubernetes today. And so we were really kind of on that cutting edge of figuring out, okay, well, how do we make this resonate to customers that have persistent data that Anthony was kind of talking about earlier? Like, because that is what makes all this possible. It's cool to go run a web server, but at the end of the day, that's not going to run your business. Everything usually needs some sort of persistent data, and being able to figure out how do we make this a consumable object for the greater masses, persistent data is really where it is. Now, we know that there are a lot of companies out there that are really cutting edge, bleeding edge, and they're the Ubers of the world, and they were the ones that were really first, and they were really carving the path of where this was going. And now we get to see, I feel that Kubernetes is at very much a stable point, where you're not at the fear of feeling that, like, oh my gosh, am I going to, start putting in something in production that I feel is going to fall over on day one? No, I mean, this has already been battle tested. It's already in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It's been there for years. You've got a whole slew of companies that are contributing to open source, that it's not just coming from one vendor, but instead this is a collaboration. This is probably the poster child of what other than Linux, of course, this is the second poster child of what open source software really is. And that really kind of shows the power of what this is becoming. And now what we're doing inside of VMware is commoditizing it and baking it into vSphere. So with the flip of a switch, you're able to just turn on Kubernetes without really having to know what to do or how to install it from the very beginning, but making it very much more easily able to be consumed.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned sort of like what you're doing there with VMware. We know we are partnering with you, even further when it comes to Kubernetes and optimizing those processes, automation, whatever it might be. So if you do want to know a little bit more about what Kenny's talking about there and how we're partnering, then I encourage you to check out a video where we really dug into how NetBackup partners with Tanzu to really optimize that protection for Kubernetes. In particular. Check it out. It's Rene Carlisle and it's David from the VMware team over on YouTube, and why not subscribe to that channel whilst you're there as well. All right, so more in depth there. But I'm interested in talking about, we hear stats about, is there a skill gap? Is there a knowledge gap within Kubernetes? Is there, we know, misconfigurations, really the main area of breaches or security concerns. Are you seeing that when we're talking to IT teams with their knowledge and skill gaps around Kubernetes?
Yeah, I'll kind of take that one first as well. Of course, there's a knowledge gap. This is something that is, for the vast majority of IT practitioners out there, this is a brand new technology. And the thing I think that is very valuable that people need to understand is that you don't have to become a Kubernetes expert on day one. You don't have to sit there and drop what you're doing and say, I've got to take the CKA and I've got to be a Kubernetes expert. That's not what it means to be. There are different, and I don't want to use the word silos, but there's different roles within inside of Kubernetes about really what can you offer. If you're a traditional vSphere admin, you don't need to go and know exactly how to deploy your application on Kubernetes. Like, let the application teams figure that out. Instead, figure out how do you map everything that you're doing from an infrastructure side to the infrastructure of Kubernetes. So if you do have a problem with a persistent volume claim and you need to understand, why is this not backing up? Where does this live? How do I restore it? Well, how does this map back into a vSphere volume? What does this map back into a data store? Does this map into a NAS? Is this my vSAN? Is this wherever? You get to understand how everything funnels up from an infrastructure point of view. As Anthony said, that is where the abstraction point hits. and then from that, the development teams take over, and then they can architect their application however they want. They can set it going across namespaces, that across clusters, and all you care about is from an infrastructure point of view. So there's definitely a way that, and of course, be a little smart. So when you're in the same room, you understand what a replica set is, but just know that you don't have to sit there and have a complete wipe and understand of what's this new technology, but you can build upon it slowly because you can bring in everything that you know from the infrastructure side. And it doesn't have to be just vSphere. It could also be if you're an AWS customer or anything like that. And you can be able to take that in and know what it means to be able to provision Kubernetes clusters and how they all map together.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Most of the time in companies, it kind of lies with the vSphere admin. Manager comes to them or CIO comes to them and says, hey, implement Kubernetes. It's not that simple. Like you mentioned, there are, silos that have different responsibilities. And a lot of the times companies aren't willing to give the developers or the application builders that kind of freedom to be able to, build their own containers or have their own resources because, there have been times in the past where, those developers may have used too many resources. So it's nice that in Kubernetes you can have that environment set up and those policies set up to be able to kind of limit what each developer can kind of do. So I feel like the first mistake that a lot of companies do is kind of put Kubernetes on the shoulders of a vSphere admin. It's definitely a group activity, and involve more than just the vSphere admin when you're trying to get Kubernetes up and running.
I worked on the Docker storage all those years ago. I was in dev. And we were using Docker as part of our CI/CD pipeline, or just containers. We had containerized how we use tools, but it was totally internal. There was no production aspect to what we were doing with containers at the time. Fast forward 5 years later, I'm starting to learn Kubernetes now, and I'm like, this is familiar, but this is clearly aimed at production workloads. This is well beyond just the dev test tooling side of things. This is now meant to be something that presents to customers and clients across many different verticals out there. So the thing I always come back to, we talked about this in the cloud episode and the previous Kubernetes episode, is get trained. I like that you said you don't need to be a certified admin because certifications take time, and oftentimes you find yourself wasting more time on the cert than actually learning the thing. But Kubernetes.io is a great resource. The Kubernetes website itself, I have found, is just a great place to demo with it, mess around in a safe space, and then follow along and learn all the little gaps and pieces that I missed in the last 5 years of not playing with this technology. So it's definitely important that you wrap your mind around it before you actually push something to production.
And you definitely hit the nail on the head. Play around with it. You can really build your own cluster at home if you want to. I'm actually working on that this weekend, where I bought a ton of Raspberry Pis and I'm building my own Kubernetes cluster. But the best way to kind of be ready for that production mindset is to just play around with it and read the documentation if you're more of a reader versus a hands-on person.
Yeah, and I'll throw one more out there. I mean, Dan's awesome to be able to go and buy a bunch of Raspberry Pis, but if you want to do it for free, we have free resources online available. So you can go to Cube Academy, and there's some free resources there on how to. It's just kind of like basic getting to know Kubernetes. And then we also have the vSphere hands-on labs, as well as VMware Pathfinder. So just Google VMware Pathfinder, and you'll be able to go and you can get hands-on with all our products, as well as get hands-on with Kubernetes once you get the products up and running, and you can figure out how to deploy all your applications and back them up as well.
Nice. All right, so we're already showing some best practices, and I encourage you to get your questions in whilst we're here. And now we've fixed those technical issues. That just proves we're live. There you go. So we are ready to answer those questions. And going back to show 2, about 6 weeks ago, a question we want to elaborate on. Girish asked about security in Kubernetes, and obviously, is that a challenge? How do we solve for that challenge? Best practices there. Dan, what's your take on how security is implemented and how we should be implementing it?
Yeah, I already mentioned how you should bring in your security department in early on in your Kubernetes lifecycle. I know Kenny has a different kind of thought process when it comes to security, and him and I agree on one thing. Security is always the showstopper. They're always the roadblock, but it's something that's really important that you need to have no matter what kind of application you plan on deploying, because at the end of the day, if there is a hack, if there is any sort of security breach, it's on the application owner, it's on the Kubernetes admin to kind of make sure that your application is as secure as possible. Because you're going to have your persistent data, you're going to have your ephemeral data. You want to make sure that everything you put out on the internet is as secure as possible, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, and I love Dan. Very, very good way to put this. And I'll also give a pitch for Tanzu Mission Control as we're doing this, because Tanzu Mission Control, granted, I said fleet-wide management, but one of the key components in it is policy management across all of your clusters. So think about going to a single cluster and saying, I want to disable pod security privileges. I want to make sure it only pulls from this particular container registry. Try doing that across 1,000 clusters. Well, now I can create one management policy and apply it to everything. And a part of Tanzu Mission Control also has CIS benchmarks. So you can run a report and it will spit out a report on your cluster that says, is this abiding by Kubernetes best practices against CIS benchmarks? So again, just another plug for Tanzu Mission Control on really easing that adoption cycle. And as Dan said, you should definitely bring in your security people, and your security people need to understand all the different nuances now that come with containers, because you don't want sort of that cross bleed or traffic or anything like that. So you want to make sure that that is being addressed as a part of this, making sure that if you do have containers, or if you do have tenants, or you have different types of applications that need to be separated by something, well, we all know that the best form of separation is still via a virtual machine, and you can do that through multiple clusters, which can be brought to you by a lot of different products inside of Tanzu today, because it's all virtual machines on top of it, or should I say underneath of it, whichever way the abstraction looks here.
Nice. Maybe little Johnny Raincloud and just say, in case everything you just heard fails and you don't catch it. In the previous episode on Kubernetes, we talked about Siloscape, which is like the first known ransomware to attack within a Windows Kubernetes cluster. There is always the nuclear option, which is a good option to have in your back pocket, which is backups, right? Like, so with the latest version of NetBackup, we offer support for Kubernetes protection at the namespace level. So the ability to protect and have a category, a library of point in times across those namespaces, across your applications running in Kubernetes. But let's abstract it even above that. So we talked about the importance of containerizing within a virtual machine, being able to protect your VMs, as well as the infrastructure above that and all of the storage layers. So having that unified data protection solution that encompasses applications, infrastructure, data, covering all bases, just in case that ransomware, Siloscape, whatever happens to your environment, you have a point in time you can get back to if the composability and ephemerality fails.
Nice plug, Anthony. Nice plug, Kenny. Well,
that's what I'm here for.
That's what we are here for, right? We wouldn't be talking about these things if we didn't solve for them and could help really solve for some of the challenges that we know you're facing as you adopt or wherever you may be on that Kubernetes journey. So, of course, that's what we're here to do. We're here to help, and we continue to do so with that partnership and with various solutions to help you do that. All right, before we reveal the lie that you told earlier, Kenny, and hopefully we can just recap on that. I'm just going to give it, open it up for best practices. You talked about training, you talked about learning, upskilling. What other best practices do you think our audience needs to take away, some golden nuggets before we leave?
Yeah,
let's go with Dan. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, I'll start off. One thing we didn't talk about is evangelizing the platform. You want to make sure that you evangelize this platform to all of the application developers. You don't want to have a single application developer run the Kubernetes environment. You want to have as many people involved as possible, because at the end of the day, the more applications you have, the more successful your infrastructure is going to be. And I mean, I'll even throw it off to Anthony about evangelizing the platform and how important that is, as far as making sure that it is successful and everybody knows about it.
Darn right. Yeah, I'll take that ball, and then I'll probably pass it to Kenny. But from the evangelization perspective, you cannot do enough for the platform itself by bringing in, like Dan, you said earlier, your entire IT team, having that conversation. If you're a DevOps team, if you're an IT ops team, or just some new spun up team that is focused on Kubernetes, ensure that everyone else, all the other stakeholders in your development, IT departments, know what you're doing and why. The one best practice I would give as an evangelist is it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Like you're not just going to boil the ocean and containerize everything and throw it all into Kubernetes pods. That is a recipe for disaster, and you will not optimize anything. Take your time, do it right. You have years of experience in traditional IT, and there's no reason why the things that work today cannot continue to work as you refactor, as you reiterate on these ideas and convert them to this new infrastructure. Passing the ball to Kenny.
I'll go ahead and take it. So to kind of just dovetail into what Anthony said, you want to try to take things and try to figure out, okay, can I boil the ocean a day? No, obviously not. You want to make sure that you take in a few different applications. How do we make this easier? How do we make this easier to consume? And how do we translate this to the rest of the applications inside of my infrastructure? So simplify, simplify, simplify. Because one of the greatest strengths and the greatest weaknesses of Kubernetes is its complexity. And if you ever try to go and build a Kubernetes cluster yourself, you will fail 7 out of 10 times.
Real fast.
True. There's certificates, there's just different ports, there's all these different things that you never even thought about just from the infrastructure side. And whether you look at vSphere or you look at a different comparing technology, you will see how do they implement their automation? How do they implement building of clusters? And at least on our side, we look at Cluster API as being that mechanism of making sure that we can consistently build clusters and we can control the entire lifecycle management. So whether it's upgrading, deleting, scaling clusters, whatever it is, it's all done through 1 or 2 command lines. And that is something that we take to heart as a part of VMware we contribute everything that we do back to the open source community to help grow those projects. And then we adopt those adopt and continue to push and use those projects as well inside of our commercial offerings too.
All right, there we go. Some best practices to take away. And speaking of community, we did get a question from Aditya who says, are there plans to come up with our own container orchestration other than Kubernetes? Just out of interest, just out of curiosity, I'm going to throw that one to Anthony. Just what would you respond to Aditya there?
Probably. As Kubernetes becomes more and more popular, I mean, we've already seen turnkey solutions. The VMware Tanzu being a really, really big and well adopted one. There's cloud solutions. There are other on-prem private cloud Kubernetes turnkeys you can get as well. Competitive being what they are, there probably will be other technologies out there that want to orchestrate containers the way that Kubernetes does. But I think the real competitor will probably end up being something like serverless infrastructure or code as a service versus another container orchestration utility.
I agree. Right. There's already been container orchestrator utilities that have already come and gone. You've seen ones from Docker, you've seen ones from HashiCorp, you've seen ones from Mesosphere, and everybody has kind of dropped what they're doing and they all jumped on the Kubernetes bandwagon. So couldn't agree with Anthony more that you're going to see other technologies, and most of them are built on top of Kubernetes. So you're going to see a lot of those things that are going to come out later.
I feel you already see that in the cloud market. You have AKS, EKS, they're all built on Kubernetes, but they each have their own kind of nuances in each of the cloud providers. So it's not really built the same. But at the end of the day, it's still Kubernetes under the covers.
There you go, Aditya. Stay tuned for what the future holds, and thanks for your question. All right. So we are run out of time, but of course we could continue this conversation on and on about Kubernetes. What should we be doing? What should we be aware of? More best practices, getting into the weeds. And you can continue that conversation with us at KubeCon, because we will be there, our platinum sponsor, October 13th to the 15th. We want to see you. We want to hear your perspective. We will have more news and perspectives to share there. KubeCon, come visit us, come say hi, and come see it in action about how we are optimizing your Kubernetes environment. See how we can help you, and talk to us and get your questions to us live in person. Hope to see you there. All right, before we go, we can't leave without getting to know Kenny. Thanks for your expertise today. Lots and lots of learnings, lots of value you've provided us. But what we really want to know is, what were you lying about earlier? All right, so Kenny, we talked about the Kentucky Derby winner. Did you have a small stake in that? Were you a TikTok viral post that The Rock reposted? Or did you stand next to Mark Cuban and waste the opportunity of a lifetime?
I want them all to be true. Why can't they all be real?
Yeah, they're all believable.
Kenny, reveal your lie.
So my lie was that I am not a minority stake owner in the 2011 Kentucky Derby winner, Animal Kingdom.
You're a majority stakeholder.
Yeah. Outright.
I wish that was the case.
Awesome. All right. So you have been ticked or reshared by The Rock. You were standing next to Mark Cuban, and we've got to know you today, and we hope to see you again through our partnership, through Veritas Live, perhaps at KubeCon as well. We look forward to working with you further. Thanks to Anthony. Thank you to Dan for your expertise as well. You have proven your expertise in Kubernetes, and we hope to see you in about 3 weeks' time when we'll be talking about digital compliance and the world of elevated threats. How do we keep compliant? Where do we start? And what will happen next? Join us to talk about digital compliance and how we can help you there. Get your questions ready. All right, continue the conversation with both VMware and with Veritas around Kubernetes, and we look forward to seeing you in 3 weeks' time back here on Veritas Live. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Sounds good. See ya.